Can't you see Mr. Auman standing on the sidelines of this football field? I can hear him talking to a reporter now before the football season started. Do we have a good bunch of boys this year? We'll win some and we'll lose some, but we'll fight hard.
Today is October the 28th, 2013. I'm Kay Williams Crawford, and I am a representative of the Historical Foundation of Hillsborough and Orange County. About 4 years ago, we began a series of stories, old Hillsborough stories that we were most familiar with from 1940 to 1975. And this year, we filmed a part of our event at the New Horizon Church in Durham, and it was a part of our high school class reunion for everyone who had graduated from Hillsborough High School. As a focus that day, we chose to focus on two of our most endeared teachers, Glenn and Henrietta Auman. Mr. Auman was a coach at Hillsborough High, and Mrs. Auman was a home economics teacher. I was fortunate to have had both of them as teachers and Mr. Auman also as a coach. My dad went to school with Mr. Auman, so I feel some close ties with this wonderful family. Unfortunately, the day we had our reunion, our tape did not work, and we are now retaping parts of that reunion for posterity. Today, I'm so happy to have Catherine Auman DeMare, who lives in Chapel Hill and has been so gracious in working with us in helping us to recall some of the important history of Mr. and Mrs. Auman, who were at Hillsborough High School longer than any couple ever was. Together they totaled more than 60 years of teaching, but most of that was done at Hillsborough High. And when Hillsborough High closed, Mr. and Mrs. Auman both went over to the new Orange High School. Now, with that preface, I am pleased to introduce you to Catherine Auman DeMare. Before Catherine begins speaking, however, I would like to read to you some of the notes she gave me today. One page is entitled, "What I Learned from My Mother, Henrietta Castleberry Auman." Number 1, have a positive outlook. 2, volunteer in the church and community. How to make yeast rolls, and the knowledge I could cook anything I wanted to if I just followed directions. If you want to spend the money, thank God you have it, and go ahead and spend it. To love the 100th Psalm and nourish your spiritual self. Take pleasure in the beauty of the sky, flowers, and birds. Have a good friend you can talk to and depend on. Learn how to sew. And Catherine said she did not know until years later that she thought that Catherine herself might be a hopeless case. Well, Catherine, do not despair. She thought the same thing of me. As a matter of fact, she told me I had better find a profession because I surely was not going to make a housewife. Mrs. Auman went on to say the important thing to do is exercise. And another, don't spend your life at the doctor's. When taking food to another group, make sure so your family can make enough so your family can have some. It's possible to work and have a normal family. Mrs. Auman's humor continues to come out in so many ways. Do what you can do, and that will be enough. And more, don't try to compete just to do your best. The cleaning will wait. Be there for your children. Control your weight. Appreciate what people do for you. Be loyal and supportive of your family. Welcome into your home anyone your children bring. Love your silver and count it before you put it up. Spoil your grandchildren by letting them know you'll help them any way you can. And her final piece of advice, appreciate your mother. That is so Mrs. Henrietta Auman. Now from some comments Catherine found in Mr. Auman's 1937 grade book. These comments were handwritten by Mr. Auman. He said, there are 9 requisites for contented living. Number 1, health enough to make work and play a pleasure. Wealth enough to support your needs. Strength to battle with your troubles and overcome them. Grace enough to confess your sins and forsake them. Patience enough to toil until good is accomplished. Charity enough to see some good in your neighbor. Love enough to move you to be useful and helpful to others. Faith enough to make real the things of God. Hope enough to remove all anxious fears concerning the future. Catherine, I hope you won't mind if we broadcast this widely for others to hear. What beautiful comments from both of your parents. Now let's hear what you have to say about your dearly beloved parents.
I thank you for honoring my parents with your memories today. I remember them as parents for sure, but also as part of our greater family of Hillsborough High School. It was the school, of course, that brought them together. Daddy, Donald Glenn Auman, was born in 1911 and grew up in Moore County, the 4th of 10 children. His was a close, hard-working, sports-loving farming family who valued education. Some of you have been to West End, especially to the peach orchard that he and 2 brothers originally started in the 1930s. My mother, Henrietta Victor Castleberry, born in 1915, was the adored middle child of a Raleigh dentist and his English-born wife. Her father died in February 1929 when she was 13, so naturally this had a big effect on her life. After graduating from Cary High School, she was a day student at Meredith, where she majored in home economics and graduated in 1936. Daddy, who was 4 years older than she, also graduated from college in 1936. He pretty much went to school during football and baseball seasons when he had a little scholarship and when he had enough money to pay the rest of his tuition. So it took him longer to get through college. But he did graduate from Elon in 1936. How did he get from there to teaching at Hillsborough High? We have Mr. Brown, Grady Brown to thank for that. Daddy was working in the dining hall at Elon during graduation week and struck up a conversation with Mr. Brown. And knowing both of them, can't we just imagine their striking up that conversation? Mr. Brown offered him a job on the spot to teach math at Hillsborough High. You know, this has made me wonder what he actually majored in college. But that summer, he did math practice teaching to the children of the Elon president. And by golly, he was a math teacher at Hillsborough High that fall. Mother taught that year in the eastern part of North Carolina in Chinquapin. She was thrilled the next year to get the job in Hillsborough, especially since it was between Greensboro, where her mother was working for the IRS, and Raleigh, where their home was. My parents always appreciated that Mr. Brown hired both of them and a whole group of wonderful people who remained their lifelong friends. After what I've heard was a mighty pursuit by Daddy, they were married at an aunt's home in Raleigh, December 17, 1939. They took a honeymoon trip to Florida and were back to teaching after Christmas break. They rented a room in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Fred Cates the rest of that school year. They soon built their house out on Highway 70A. For the rest of their lives, except for a brief time during World War II, they lived there, devoting themselves to their family, church, Hillsborough High School, and the community. My beautiful sister Vicki was born in 1943 while Daddy was in the Navy, and I was born in 1947. We grew up thoroughly enmeshed in the school life. It was a great way to grow up, and I have a lot of memories. And I'll just say as an aside here that in all my life, I have never been able to be as cool as you teenagers were in high school. I thought next I would mention a few vivid memories of the times about each of them and would love for you to share some of your memories and thoughts with me later. Daddy taught some people math, some people how to drive, and a lot of people PE. But most of the memories probably have to do with sports. For basically his whole career, he coached football, girls basketball, and baseball. What was his favorite? He would say whatever sport was in season was his favorite. Finally, looking back on it, my mother thought his favorite was baseball because it's really not over until that last out. And he was somebody who never gave up hope. We always ate supper together. If it were an away football or basketball game, we would eat about 4 or 4:30. In baseball season, it was whenever that game was over and he got home. Who could forget the old gym? Even though it was old, that dark hardwood floor was considered the best in the conference, mainly because he babied that floor and really took care of it. Besides basketball, he had it set up so the classes could play shuffleboard, tetherball, and volleyball, even a kind of tennis. He slung heavy ropes over the rafters so there could be climbing exercises. Does anyone remember the set of weights he made out of tin cans from the cafeteria and concrete? He loved to have square dances and sock hops in that gym. Emphasis on socks. He did not want anyone wearing normal shoes on that floor. I remember when there wasn't a game clock in the gym. I remember because people would get me to go ask the scorekeeper how much time was left in the quarter. Everyone was thrilled, especially Daddy, to get that fabulous time clock, which was actually moved to the new gym when it opened in the fall of 1958. A few words about football and baseball. How did you guys manage to play on that field behind the school? He did the best he could with it. I remember in the summer riding in the car with him as he drove back and forth on the field, pulling a homemade drag stacked with heavy rocks as he tried to level out the field. Also, you may remember, as I do, that in elementary school, sometimes during our recess, our teachers got us in a line across the field. Then we would walk in that straight line the length of the field, all the while picking up little rocks. We children did the best we could, but there were so many rocks. During baseball season, he kept the bases and other gear in the trunk of our car. I was pretty much an adult before realizing that in truth, not all car trunks were dirty and dusty. You hear a lot about sex education in the schools today. Looking back on it, I realized that my parents were way ahead of the times. Do you remember the film strip All About Girls? They both showed it. I don't remember a film strip about boys, but they did try to teach us about boys too, while being as discreet as possible. I didn't take my mother's class, but I remember in PE, on those health days, Daddy's face would be red and he would be sort of rocking back and forth. The topic wasn't the easiest thing to talk about, but they thought it was important, and so they did it. Through the years, when their former students would speak to me, a lot of topics have been mentioned, but I don't recall that anyone has ever mentioned sex education or health education. With Daddy, as I said earlier, most people have a sports-related memory, maybe having to do with a practice, game, or after a game going to Jack's or somewhere else. With my mother, the memories shared have often been a practical life skill they learned from her. How to sew, and yes, there are many zipper stories. How to cook, how to organize a kitchen. As a child, I loved reading your home project reports, and believe it or not, I still use some of the recipes you gave her. Of course, through the years, many people have told me, with a little guilty conscience, I think, how they would feel free to talk and cut up in home ec class because they knew she wore hearing aids and probably would not know anyway. I've guessed that they were the days she said at supper, "The girls were a little too noisy today, so I just turned my hearing aids down so they didn't bother me." She was an 11-month employee, and part of her job was visiting students in their homes. She traveled all over northern Orange County visiting students, sometimes, as it would happen, in a very intimate time in the family's life, in palatial homes and in very humble homes. For years, as my family can attest, when we would be out going somewhere, she would point over and say, "Oh, so-and-so lived there. I wonder how she's doing." Or, "I visited over there." I've wondered if anyone besides me remembers those visits. She loved her FHA girls and activities. She was always excited when it was time for FHA week at White Lake. She was also really delighted when the home ec girls and ag boys would switch classes for the week. She taught many night classes for the community too. Sewing classes, first aid, home nursing, how to make aluminum trays. She loved to learn a new craft or skill, mainly, I think, so she could teach it to others. After Hillsborough High closed in 1963, Daddy became the coach for Orange High, but they both stayed at the old building to teach the ninth graders. Eventually, though, they both taught at Orange. Daddy left PE when he got older and developed the Industrial Cooperative Training ICT program, and Mother started the Professional Food Services program there. They retired from the Orange County schools in 1975. They continued to be busy, though. I remember Daddy saying he didn't know how they had time to work. And being retired myself now, I can identify with that. They were both very involved with their church, Hillsborough Presbyterian. Daddy was especially involved in the early years of OCIM, and he continued to be active in the Exchange Club and with the Red Cross. He devoted even more time to his loves of gardening and woodworking. Mother was active in many different organizations. In fact, when Tom was a little boy, he asked her, "Grandma, what's a meeting?" She was a longtime chairman of the museum board and was very devoted to the Historical Society and Garden Club. She thoroughly enjoyed her DAR chapter, and as its representative, volunteered for years every Friday at the VA hospital. She always visited the psych patients because she said other volunteers didn't like to go on that ward. As you know, Vicki died of breast cancer in 1980 when she was 36. It was tough, but they were sustained by their faith, family, and friends. Tom became our first child then, and a few weeks later, our daughter, his sister, Christine Auman DeMar, was born. 2 years later, our second daughter, Carolyn, was born. Of course, these children brought so much joy and happiness to both my parents. One morning in August 1985, about the time school would be starting and football season really getting going, they had already canned tomatoes together, and Daddy was, as usual, out in his workshop. When he didn't come in for lunch, or The Price is Right, Mother went out to look for him. He was sitting on a chair with his arms slung over the back and his head slumped down. He died in his workshop, and as our minister said, it was a moment between Glenn Auman and God. Mother, of course, missed him every day for the rest of her life, but she did well and went on with life, enjoying her activities, helping us with the children, going to the gym, traveling, and she loved seeing you out and about around town. She lived in the house out on 70A the rest of her life, only the last few months needing someone to be there with her. She died, I would say, of old age in February 2003. She was ready and realized it was happening. By the grace of God, I happened to be there. She looked at me and said, "Bye-bye." They were not perfect people, but they were really strong Christians who tried to do their best in life. They were certainly good role models for me. Thank you for your time here and for your part in their lives, because it's for sure that next to their families and faith, they loved and were most devoted to you, the people of Hillsborough High School.